like a fancy layer cake at a bougie high tea. There are so many ingredients that go into a healthy and happy childhood. Of course, it's easy to get wrong. Riki, you know how to bake. Tell us, what's up?
Let me start with a story.
I like stories.
I had a chat with a friend the other day at the supermarket, and we were chatting about our weekends, and he mentioned that he'd been to a school reunion. And he was saying that all the guys at the pub were sharing their stories about this exclusive private school that they'd all been to. So I was expecting to hear some pretty,
Private
impressive
jets and celebrity parties and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I just thought, I've heard a lot about this school. I bet it's amazing. And he just launched straight into their discussions about the cane.
Oh, wow.
And about being beaten. And up until 1989, all teachers and head teachers and, principals, anybody,
janitors,
were allowed to use the cane to punish the boys. And in 1989, that changed before it was completely banned in all schools. In 1989, it changed in this private school where only the head teachers and the principal and deputy principal were allowed to use the cane. And all the other teachers from that point onwards were not allowed to hit the kids. Mm-hmm. And he was sharing that the shift that all of the students, his friends, noticed that happened to the teachers when the teachers were no longer allowed to take out their, aggression on the kids. Yeah. They were all having heart attacks and stents put in and bypasses. And he said they were just imploding. He said that the teachers didn't know, once that outlet for them to be able to beat the children in the classroom was taken away, he said that they couldn't cope. They just were kind of outraged and they just didn't know what else to do. So they sort of course, yell and scream, but their bodies just literally exploded.
So let me get this straight. What you're trying to say is the best cure for heart disease is beating children.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad we've got that message through.
But it just got me thinking how, the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I thought, well, people entrust schools to look after their kids and hope that the mental health of the people looking after them is, pretty good in order to some degree. And then if that's happening where the adults caring for the children, they're relying on the fact that they can use brute force, whether that be aggressive language or whether, it's in this instance, it was actually hitting the kids with a stick.
Yeah.
And if they can no longer use the children in that way, then that's pretty devastating.
That's an interesting story. Thanks for sharing that, Riki. Us adults, we have a lot of work to do. And it's like the outcome of a child is dependent on our mental health, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But like you said, those kids felt the vibe difference. They felt the room change.
Yeah.
These teachers walked in with all this power up until that point who knew that I'm on top of this and I'm probably
all I need
doing
to
the
do,
old...
pull out the stick.
Yeah,
exactly.
What's that, Jimmy? Yeah, that's what I thought. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then after that, all that power is taken away. And what power is left? So you weren't respecting the teacher, you were fearing the cane.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of parenting, that we get our power from the fact that we're bigger than these tiny little things, these little tykes. And what happens when we take that away? What happens when your children grow up? In other words, when
30 years later, what stories will they tell about you, How will they remember you?
And why are they connected to you at that point in life? What's the power dynamic then? Because, you've grown up with this, this threat of violence this whole time. How do you control your children at that point? Why would they respect you at that point if you've got nothing? So you raise a really good point. That story brings up a lot of things for me, definitely. Especially as a male, because how does a male have power in a relationship? And I think a lot of discussions when it comes to power, it's always a top-down power. That's the way we visualize it. What have you got over someone else? Whereas I think there's other models of power where it's about sharing. Why would someone come back to you? What power do you have that draws them back to you? Well, because you're an awesome person. That's why. Because you're funny. Because, that food tastes good. That's why you go back to that food, right? It's not because you have to eat it, otherwise someone's going to shoot you. But that's what it's like sometimes in relationships, whether it's child teacher or child parent, sadly, or even boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, girlfriend. We treat each other pretty badly because we want power, and we think power is that being able to grab something, take it, and do what we want with it, manipulate it. And the cane is so manipulative. The threat of violence is so manipulative, isn't it?
And often the boys, he said, would choose the cane because they got to choose sometimes either to get, I don't know how many beatings with the stick or a whole half of a Saturday detention.
Yeah.
So he said often the boys would just say, oh, look, I'll just take the cane because they don't want to lose half their Saturday sitting in detention. So, there's so many layers of power. And
I want to talk about power. It's really important, but I'm just going to do a little slight segue. One of the reasons, there are many reasons to not beat a child, right? Many, many reasons. In fact, to me, there's no reason why you should beat a child. But one of the reasons I don't is because I actually don't want our kids to be afraid of violence. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive and a little bit weird, but I want my kids to be able to stand up. If I were to threaten them, I'd want them to look at me and say, let's go, right? Even at a really young age. I remember our youngest once, when he was really, really small, something happened between him and his brother, and he just ran up to his brother. He was about 18 months and just kicked him and then ran off. And it was kind of cute because he was in a nappy when he did it. But I thought, wow, this kid's got a lot of fire. And I really respected that. So I want our kids to know that, hey, if someone threatens you, that's not a reason to do what they want you to do. There are times, of course, when it's life and death. If they've got a knife and you're unarmed, you just hand over whatever it is and, you go home and you lick your wounds. That's okay. You don't want to get into a fight in that situation. But if your boss is threatening you, if someone's threatening you, to get fired because you don't do this or whatever, you stand up for yourself. And I feel like threatening a child with violence is conditioning them to cower. I don't want to do that. I want to empower them. I want them to know that, no, I'll stand up for myself because it's not worth getting bullied. The trauma of dealing with one fight is way less than dealing with the trauma of dealing with a bully. So that's my weird reasoning.
No, it sounds like you would want them to be able to notice when there is a time where, there's an appropriate time to stand up and say, no, I won't accept that. Yeah,
exactly. Look, I've recently had a situation personally where I've had to stand up to an organisation, and I felt the lessons the kids got out of that were huge. They were proud of me. I had a whole family behind me, not just my children and Riki, but my own parents, my brother, my sister. They all backed me, my friends. And it was tough, but they saw that it was worth it. And they know that, hey, you don't just give in. I won't back down, just like Tom Petty. But back to power and the power dynamics between either people who are bigger compared to little children or people who just are in bigger positions. For example, a headmaster over a teacher or over a head teacher over a teacher, that sort of thing, or over a janitor even. That's within a school environment. Of course, there's partnerships, there's all sorts of power dynamics. How do we share power? How do we make power work for everybody? I don't know, is that the crux of the issue? How do we make power work? Or what does power actually look like?
Yeah, and that's probably a question we need to ask ourselves continuously over a lifetime. How do we share power?
Yeah, I think the first question is you've got to ask yourself, what's your source of power? Because we all get self-esteem from something, right? Some of us are born great. There are some people out there who are just born healthy and they've got these perfect genes, they're smart and all this sort of stuff.
Born into a wealthy, abundant sort of environment.
And their power essentially comes from nature. That's just how it is. They've got social status because of where they were born, who their parents are, all that sort of stuff. And power just comes naturally. So they don't really have to think about it. But for a lot of us, we have to ask ourselves, why do I have self-esteem? Or where does my self-esteem come from? And in a situation where you're in charge of something smaller, someone smaller, a job or whatever it is, a lot of your self-esteem and power comes from how well you deal with that situation. So I think it's really important to ask yourself that first question. Where do I get my power? And quite often we're trying to prove ourselves so that we can feel powerful. And that's a real roadblock sometimes, isn't it? When we're constantly trying to show our worth to the world. It's so easy for an animal. They exist. That means they're good enough. If you can hunt down your prey or forage well enough or build a dam if you're a beaver, then you're good enough for nature and you've got nothing else to prove, right? You'll find a mate through that. Whereas as humans, competing for a mate is much more difficult. Proving our worth to society is much more difficult as well. So ask yourself that question. Where do I get my power?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. And then how do I use that, or how do I adapt that in a relationship? Because you've got relationships everywhere. You've got relationships with your children, with your spouse, with your employer, with your clients, with everybody. So how do you share? Or how do we all share? How do we share political power?
I guess it all comes back to self-care and knowing yourself. And so if we're just always focusing on ourselves and focusing in on where we're feeling powerless, and that's usually a place to start, I guess, if we're feeling powerless and explore that so that we don't then have to feel as if we have to use our power in a way that is not beneficial to those who are less powerful around us.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think self-care comes in when we need it. And when we need it is when we're tipped off equilibrium, when we've lost our power.
Yeah.
When we don't feel as powerful anymore. Yeah. Self-care, everybody. I want to go back to your story. These teachers in this exclusive private school. Let's just hypothesize here. I think their power came from they were employees at a very exclusive school. So there was prestige attached to their role. And that they had authority over people who were younger and smaller than them. But if the children don't feel the same way, if the children don't feel your prestige and your expertise, then the power dynamic isn't there because they don't have that respect for you. So that was enforced by the cane. And when the cane was taken away, there was no way to show your power. So as a teacher, and this is a homeschooling channel, to get the respect that a teacher deserves is having the right expertise and treating the children in the correct way. This isn't always possible, of course, if the children aren't ready. There's a saying, when the student is ready, the master appears. I'm a firm believer in that. I've watched a lot of 80s martial arts movies. It's absolutely true. Okay. But if Van Damme has taught me anything, it's that some people just aren't ready for things. And especially in the wrong numbers. If you've got a class of 30 people, certain dynamics appear. And of course, that's all about power too, isn't it? There's, little cliques that appear in those groups of 30. There's people who want this and there's people who want that. So it just doesn't work. But in an ideal situation, if we want to create a great learning environment, we need teachers or facilitators who are healthy.
And willing and wanting to be there.
Humble, of course, willing to work on themselves, understand what their role is, understand what their source of power is, with expertise, and that they can communicate that well to the child and have a relationship with the child that's equitable. So that's my goal as a parent. I'm doing my best and there are so many roadblocks. I'm the roadblock. That's the thing. When I say so many roadblock, it's me in the way every single step of the way. I know that, so at least I can work on myself. At least I've got something to work on. And the reason why this talk came up was because we realized, look, we can mess up this whole parenting thing so easily. I was trying to think about what parenting actually is this morning, and it was like, we had a child because we wanted to. But why would you want to have a child? Because you've got this vision of raising a baby into an adult. But that vision's based on your worldview. So we think we know something that's worthwhile. So let's just say we had this vision of creating this Black Forest cake. And then we put the ingredients in the bowl, but the ingredients have their own idea. They're like, I'm actually a mud cake. And they just start doing their own thing. It's up to us to adapt and go, that's a mud cake. Let's bake that into a mud cake. Not, I'm going to fight it every step of the way and turn it into what I thought was a worthwhile cake. I'm only using a cake because that was what I used in the intro. I'm crazy. But that's what I'm trying to do now. And it's been really hard for me personally because I had a vision of what life looked like. I had my own worldview. And now I know, well, look, everyone's worldview is valid. So I'm trying to step out of the way, trying to not be the roadblock anymore. Riki, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
Oh, no, that's beautiful what you just said. Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same, that it's whenever there's an issue, it's always me. Always, it's like, oh, okay, I need to step back and have a look what's going on for me.
Yeah.
And then once I've done that, I come back to the situation. It's like, now I can see the situation as it really is rather than through my, attempt to anyway, as much as anyone can.
Yeah.
But, with more clarity anyway, not perfect laser vision or anything, but with more clarity and go, okay, now I know that it was my stuff that was getting in the way of me being able to connect and see the situation as clearly as possible.
Yeah. So everybody, let's try to make life as frictionless as possible by knowing who we are, what our source of power is, and being humble and just trying to learn so that we can all be better parents. We'd love to know what you think, so make sure you comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't. If you enjoyed this, please give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, what can we do? Thanks, Riki.
Thank you, Kiwi. Thanks so much.